Hi everyone, my name is Jeffrey Lee, and welcome to the 7th episode of the series where we talk about the book Fur Trades and Human Civilization. Today we're going to be wrapping up Chapter 2 with sections 2.5, the last third of it, and sections 2.6 and 2.7. So starting us off, let's talk about 2.5.3, the Sino-Russian trade. So the Treaty of Nerchinsk clearly defined the border between China and Russia, with Article 6 of the treaty stating, as the two countries are to be forever in peace, future generations may travel and trade with proper permits, granting the legitimacy of trade between Russia and China. Over the centuries, as mentioned in previous sections, China had implemented a policy of seclusion since the Ming Dynasty, continued to the Qing Dynasty, where trade with countries like Spain and Portugal and the Netherlands were only possible through smuggling. In contrast, the Russian merchants were free to trade, which proved highly profitable. Tsar Peter the Great sent his Dutch envoy Isbrand Ides to Beijing in 1692 to negotiate expanding trade permits to include caravans, which China accepted. They continued to expand their trade relationship, allowing them both great profits. Russia prohibited the outflow of private metals and found bartering more profitable than trading gold and silver. So some key Russian exports to China included fur and pelts, fabrics, and other goods like coarse linen, leather, tan hides. On the other hand, the Chinese exports to Russia included things like raw silk and silk products, tea, and porcelain. Furs were the primary trade goods for Russian merchants, fetching high prices in China due to their desirability and the Chinese traders' willingness to exchange valuable goods for them. The Treaty of Kayaka designated Zhuhaitu as the second trading post, located at 49 degrees 20 degrees north near the headwaters of the Irgun River, and these trade routes were important for connecting Russia and China, building up their trading relationship. So now let's talk about how Russia expanded to the Aleutian Islands and Alaska. So this is when they began moving from Asia to North America. So first of all, in 1725, Peter the Great dispatched the Danish explorer Vitus Bering to explore the Siberian coast, directing him to sail to the easternmost point of Siberia and cross the Pacific Ocean to claim North American territories. He reached the Bering Strait, but did not find any North American lands, and later in 1733, they were on another expedition. On this expedition, they reached the Aleutian Islands, and here the crew faced severe storms, spoiled food, and a lack of fresh water, resulting in many deaths. Later, they found Bering Island, where Bering died. However, here they also found many sea otters, which they hunted for pelts. They also captured local Aleutian women and children as hostages to force the indigenous people to hunt sea otters. The Aleuts rebelled as a result, leading to brutal reprisals from the Russians. Sea otter pelts became a major export of Russia, earning them a lot of money and being known as soft gold. As the sea otter population along the Aleutian coast dwindled, Russian traders moved from the island chain, gradually expanding into southern Alaska for more pelts. Russian geographer Nikola Darkin explored the Kuvarin River in Alaska, and by 1784, Russians had established the first outpost on Kodiak Island. In the Crimean War, Russia was defeated by the Ottoman Empire, Britain, and France, and newly enthroned Tsar Alexander II, wary of further conflicts, considered the proximity of British colonial Canada to eastern Alaska a threat. Russian forces in Alaska were weak, and the region's fur resources were nearly depleted. Alaska's harsh climate and poor soil made it unsustainable, requiring substantial government subsidies. In 1854, the U.S. Secretary of State William L. Marcy approached the Russian ambassador in America about purchasing Russian America, leading the Tsar to contemplate selling Alaska. This would eliminate a direct British threat, alleviate financial burdens, and cultivate a third-party opposition to Britain. As a result, during the American Civil War, President Lincoln sought Russian assistance, and Russia sent a fleet to New York, boosting U.S. morale even though the fleet did not engage in combat. Later, they signed a treaty of cession, selling Alaska for $7.2 million, thus ending Russian territorial claims in North America. Later, quite ironically, they found gold, and a gold rush ensued in Alaska. Now let's talk about how they expanded to the U.S. West Coast and California, as you can see in this map. So Russia exploitations of Siberian fur resources resulted in enormous profits, but the depletion of these resources led them to explore other lands. So first off, in California, the waters off California were rich in sea otter populations, and by the 1780s, the Spanish were hunting sea otters in California, and indigenous Native Americans had long been engaged in fur trapping. American fur traders who traveled around Cape Horn from South America sought collaboration with the experienced Aleut hunters under Russian control to harvest furs. They used kayaks and then had long been exploited by the Russians. Noticing the abundance of sea otters along the California coast, American fur trader Jonathan Winship approached Alexander Andreevich Baranov, co-founder of the Russian-American Company, proposing a joint venture in sea otter hunting. Under a contract for an equal share of the catch, Russians provided 15 kayaks and 34 Aleut hunters, yielding over 600 sea otter pelts on their fur expedition. Simultaneously, Russia also needed agricultural colonies in California to supply Alaska and the Aleutian Islands with provisions. Russian attempts at agriculture in Alaska failed due to the harsh climate, sparse population, and poor soil. Similar issues plagued Kamchatka and the Chukotka Peninsula. As a result, they came to an agreement where the Americans were able to provide agriculture to these colonies. So let's also talk about how the Russian attempted to colonize California and Hawaii. In 1722, an advisor to Tsar Peter the Great, who had previously served as governor of Siberia, suggested that Chukchi and Kamchatka regions were very close to the west coast of North America. One of the objectives of Bering's expedition, commissioned by Peter the Great, was to reach a town owned by the Europeans. They discovered many natives, and later the Russians established a settlement at Bodega Bay north of San Francisco. They purchased land from local Native Americans situated 96 kilometers north of present-day San Francisco for the price of 3 blankets, 3 pairs of trousers, 2 axes, 3 hoes, and some beads. This settlement was named Fort Ross. Here they hunted sea otters. However, by 1820, the local sea otter population had been almost entirely depleted. Despite initial success in fur hunting, the Russians faced significant challenges in agriculture again. As a result, they decided to sell the fort and its surrounding land to John Augustus Sutter, a German Swiss immigrant. Ironically, just over 6 years later, in January 1848, the first piece of gold was discovered at Sutter's mill, triggering the California gold rush. So twice Russia missed a chance at getting gold, first in Alaska and now in California. In 1804, during a Russian circumnavigation, Russians first arrived in Hawaii by ship. The primary goal of the Russian fleet, led by Ivan Fedorovich Krustarin, was to secure supplies such as food and salt for Russian territories along the Pacific coast. There, they encountered King of Hawaii Kamehameha I, and there they also began to try the colonization. So later, the king learned of the Russians' need and reached out to Alexander Baranov, offering an annual supply of food in exchange for sea otter pelts. By 1810, Kamehameha had unified the Hawaiian Islands, with Kamali remaining as a chief of Kauai under his rule. Later, the Russian-American Company's ship Bering, carrying fur trade goods, encountered a storm and arrived at Waimea Bay, where Kamali detained it. In response, they sent George Anton Schaefer to Hawaii to recover the Bering's cargo. Later, they retrieved the cargo, and they formed an alliance with Kamali in hopes of overthrowing Kamehameha. And in 1816, Schaefer built Fort Elizabeth on Kauai. However, Russians on Oahu were expelled by Kamehameha I for illegal construction activities. Kamehameha, with support from American merchants, resisted Schaefer and Kamali, and later they decided to leave Hawaii instead. The Schaefer affair resulted in losses exceeding 200,000 rubles for the Russian-American Company. Later, the Hudson Bay Company of North America signed a long-term contract with the Russian-American Company to supply provisions to its Alaskan outposts, indirectly leading to Russians' abandonment of Fort Ross in California in 1841. Then the Earth would go into a period known as Little Ice Age, and as a result, this led to enormous profits being generated. However, In contrast, the landlocked Grand Duchy of Moscow embarked on a radically different path of expansion and development, spanning 3 continents while restraining the British colonies along the North Pacific coast. Unlike the European maritime powers, Russia did not possess substantial gold and silver mines or globally sought after commodities like silk and tea. They didn't control vital trade routes such as the Strait of Malacca or the Cape of Good Hope, and they did not have the latest military equipment of the time. The key to Russia's rise was extensive exploitation and firm control of fur resources across Europe, Asia, and America. This allowed Russia to trade advantageously with China, acquiring highly marketable goods and selling them in Europe for significant profits. These profits filled the treasury, supported military expansion, and underpinned Russia's growth into a superpower. The continuous expansion of Russian territory brought more furs, generating more wealth, which in turn financed further territorial conquest. The cyclical reinforcement made fur a crucial factor in Russia's development. Russia's methodological conquest of Siberia involved consistent steps, first starting with military force, hostage-taking, fort construction, then administrative integration. Russia's expansion strategy involved methodically establishing forts and administrative posts, fostering cultural assimilation, and solidifying government through colonization, exile, and resettlement. This method ensured stable control over new territories. In contrast, France's vast North American colony, New France, focused primarily on extracting fur resources for profit, without substantial settlement or infrastructure development. Despite its vast area of approximately 6.48 million square kilometers, New France had a sparse population of about 70,000 by the time of the Seven Years' War. In comparison, the British North American colonies, covering about 1.94 square kilometers, had a population of 2 million, which contributed to British's success in gaining control over former French territories. Yeah, that's it for chapter 2. I hope you enjoyed. And yeah, so this chapter we went over the entirety of Russia's expansion and how they used the fur trade to its benefit and how the fur trade spurred its growth into the power it is today. Thank you for watching. As always, you can buy my book on Amazon and feel free to like and subscribe.